Now, Munster fly half Ben Healy is among 4 on-cap players that have been named in Scotland's Six Nations squad today. Also among them, the former England wing, Rory McConaughey. McConaughey appeared at the last World Cup for England, but earned the second of 2 England caps now 3 years ago. Very similar situation to John Cooney, potentially later this year, who could make the switch from Ireland to Scotland as well. So he is eligible to switch nationalities. Healy, as well as the Leicester lock Cameron Henderson and Glasgow centre Stafford McDowell, could all make their test debuts in the coming weeks. Healy, who is set to join Edinburgh from Munster at the end of this season, previously represented Ireland and won a Grand Slam at under 20 level. However, he qualifies for Scotland through his grandparents and has been called up in the absence of the injured Adam Hastings. To have a look at the squad and Ben Healy's international prospects with Scotland, Tom English of the BBC is with us. Tom, good evening to you.
Good evening, how are you?
Look, I guess it was a predictable one that this acceleration into the squad was going to happen after Adam Hastings got injured, but a very unusual situation for us here in Ireland to see a player who's contracted at a province called up by another country.
Yeah, it doesn't happen all that often, does it? Listen, it was on the cards, very much so. Scotland have been chasing Healy for quite some time, and obviously Edinburgh landed him there recently. And once Hastings got injured and he's out for the entirety of the Six Nations, Healy looked like a shoe-in. Ross Thompson, the young Glasgow 10, he's also injured. He was in the squad in the autumn. So really, a couple of injuries and Healy is in.
Our understanding is this goes back over 2 years ago that Gregor Townsend has been interested in Ben Healy, and Glasgow's attempted recruitment of him late in 2019 before he signed a contract extension at Munster. And even just listening to the press conference earlier, Gregor Townsend, it sounds like Ben Healy's a player that he has been watching quite closely for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke to him today at the press conference and he kept saying, he's different types of 10 now. So the Healy is very different to Russell, and he's very different to Kinghorn, and he's very different to Hastings. He really likes Healy's kind of mental strength. He spoke about that. His game awareness. He's more mature than he had any right to be at that age. So I think he really likes him, for sure. And you're right. Yeah, they've been chasing him for quite some time. I think it's good business for Edinburgh, for Scotland, and for Healy, because he will get a run of games at Edinburgh. I mean, there are a couple of 10s there, but I think he will certainly get more game times than he's been getting with Munster.
Yeah, it's in the reaction from Edinburgh fans. They were delighted to get a young out half, even in the case of Healy, where he'd slipped behind Crowley as the number 2 behind Joey Carberry. Still, Healy has shown that he's got plenty of potential. Now Edinburgh have got a player they can mould from next season.
Yeah, and like they have Kinghorn, who's been playing 10. That's at Gregor Townsend's kind of insistence, the Blair switch project, as they call it over here, from a fullback to a 10. Whether Edinburgh and Scotland continue with that, that's up for grabs. I hope they don't. I don't think Kinghorn is a 10. I think it's been very unfair on him. I think he's a very good 15, and he's a good wing. He's a better 15 in a wing than he is a 10, in my opinion. If they revert to Kinghorn at 15, that's good news for Healy. That means he's got Charlie Savala, a 22-year-old, in his way at 10, not Kinghorn and Savala. Van de Vault is also there, but I think the word is that he will be leaving the club in the summer. So, I mean, it's pointless Edinburgh signing Healy if they're not going to give him proper game time, and I think they will.
We were suggesting a little bit earlier, if you look at this Scotland squad, which has got the 4 on-card players, is there a certain amount of experimentation from Gregor Townsend within the Six Nations itself with the World Cup in mind, or what's the temperature in Scotland about the Six Nations itself?
Always cautious optimism. I know everyone in Ireland loves to portray Scotland as arrogant and bigging themselves up. They don't. They don't. Ireland have this fixation with Scotland talking themselves up. They absolutely don't. It's like some of the, say, McConaughey, for example, who dropped out of the sky. Like no one saw that coming. 31-year-old winger, couple of caps for England. Very Scottish name, obviously, but he wasn't mapped. He wasn't rumoured. total surprise when we fetched up at Murrayfield today and his name was on the list. He's there because Darcy Graham is injured, Damien Hoyland is injured. They're kind of light on wings. I'd be staggered if McConaughey gets any matches in the Six Nations. I'd be really surprised.
From reading Gregor Townsend's comments from earlier, and you were covering the press conference, he seems to have made a very personal effort to make sure that the McConaughey transfer happened. He went down to meet him in Bath and to assess whether he was interested in playing for Scotland.
Yeah, and I think we'll see. Well, we've seen a lot of this from Scotland already. He says, not that it's the case with McConaughey, but with other players, with well, it actually is the case with McConaughey because he's obviously played for England. He said that when the rule was changed, that particular rule was changed, a number of players contacted him, as in Townsend, to say, oh, by the way, I'm available. McConaughey, I think, was one of those, or McConaughey's people were one of those. He's a big lump, he's a big 6'2". I haven't kept a close eye on his form this season, but Townsend says the last couple of games has been very, very good. It's not a lot to go on, but he's not blessed with top class wings. Darcy Graham is a cruel blow for Scotland because he was absolutely flying in the autumn, sensational form. So they'll miss him for most of the Six Nations. They're hoping to get him back towards the end, maybe the Ireland game. But he needs reinforcements. And he's a couple more injuries on the wing. And McConaughey gets in. We'll see how he goes. But I think there's others well ahead of him. Sean Maitland has come back in again from the blue. But he's in very good form for Saracens. So he's got a real chance of playing.
Yeah, look, McConaughey's first cap could come at Twickenham. I mean, what a story that would be, potentially. Ben Healy could play, depending on what happens with the rest of the number 10s by the time that comes around to the Ireland game. Yeah. Looking through this as well, Tom, when it comes to the squad that's been picked by Scotland, and as you say, there's some injured players that are there. I mean, obviously they've been boosted by some of the players who have been involved, but not having Darcy, not having Scott Cummings because of injury this time around as well. Yeah. These are big players who are missing. They have to see what happens with Hamish Watson. I don't think he's 100% fit, maybe mightn't be ready for the first game. But it's going to be an opportunity to have a look at some of these players in what's a pretty difficult start to have England and Wales at the start of this competition.
Yeah, and England with a new coach, Wales with a new coach, well, newish, if you call it Warren Gatland.
A returning new, yeah.
The returning prodigal. Brutal start, really, for Scotland. I don't think he's experimenting. I think he's going, fully loaded as much as he can. There was a huge sigh of relief today when he said that Xander Fagerson was fit to play. He's been out injured. Tight head prop. Scotland really don't have anyone in remotely in Fagerson's class, so that was a big relief. The squad, it's a decent squad. It's certainly got holes in it. It's got holes certainly at tight head. There's no backup to Fagerson, and how fit is Fagerson going to be? Are they putting him in there just because they're hoping for the best, or is he actually fit to play? Watson. He says he's in training and he's ready to go. He says everyone on that team, that list of players, is all of them are available to play against England. I hope he's right, and he's not wishful thinking.
Yeah, we've been speculating for quite some time over here, Tom, about what's going to happen with John Cooney. And John Cooney's been asked repeatedly about potentially playing for Scotland, and he's open to the idea. Is there much talk in Scotland about him potentially coming in later this year?
Yeah, there is. There's bits and pieces. I would say largely negative about it. Respectful of what a good player he is. But it'll be a tough one for them to swallow. I mean, McConaughey is a tough enough one for them to swallow. People are going, what's going on here? He made his choice. He picked England. You made your bed, you lie in it. But Townsend doesn't see it that way. There was no mention of Cooney at all today. So if it happens, I'd be a touch surprised. I think there'll be a very, very negative response to it. The Scotland have 4 or 5 scrum halves, some of them young. Jamie Dobie at Glasgow. There's a couple of others, young, around that age. And I think if Cooney was to be parachuted in, even though he's a good player, at his age, that would be a terrible look for Scottish rugby, and it would go down very badly, especially since kind of like the media stuff that Cooney has done. It's like, make it up my mind, I'll wait and see. That's not exactly sending a message out there to Scottish rugby that he's mad keen to play for Scotland, It's almost like hanging in there, geez, I'll see if Andy Farrell picks me, and if not, sure, I'll go off to Scotland and that'll do me. It's not going down well.
It's very different to Ben Healy, where Ben Healy is committed to signing to Edinburgh and where Ben Healy is already qualified and hadn't played for the Irish senior team. They feel like two very different cases here.
Totally. Healy's a completely different case. And he has committed his future to Edinburgh. You can't get much more committed than that. Everyone recognises that he's been not unlucky with Munster, but he's just, you got two guys ahead of him, Carby and Crowley. He needs to get out there into the world and play rugby. And there's a great opportunity for him in Edinburgh. Great opportunity. So I think Edinburgh fans are delighted to get him. They've seen bits and pieces of him in the URC, and they like what they see. And like Edinburgh, the very experienced squad, Edinburgh, but they're still missing that kind of hard edge, that thing when Healy comes off the bench, he scores that try against Ulster, wins the game, that kind of thing, Kinghorn isn't that type of player. Kinghorn is a square peg in a round hole at 10. So I think Edinburgh people would love to see Kinghorn come back to 15, or even wing, and bring Healy in at 10 and give him a proper run. See what he's made of.
Yeah, and what is the conversation as well, Tom, when it comes to some of the players that are being naturalised into Scotland? Because you said about maybe there was a slight negative feeling about the idea of Cooney switching country. There have been some South Africans who have naturalised to play for Scotland in recent seasons, and there was a piece in the Times at the weekend about the amount of players that Scotland have that have been born outside of Scotland. What is the debate nationally about that at the moment now?
Yeah, it comes up periodically. There is a lot of, there's a lot of players coming in with, Scottish granny or grandfather, the 3-year residency rule. There's a lot of that going on in Scotland. Some of it sticks in the craw, but you also have to look at the big picture. And Scotland have won absolutely nothing since 1999. As a country, they've won as a rugby country. They've won one trophy, and that was when Glasgow won the Pro 12 in Belfast against Munster. So, like, desperate times call for desperate actions, and if these guys are available to Scotland, then Gregor Townsend is going to pick them because he's desperate to drag Scotland forward. And like the rationale would be, okay, if you've got a Duhan van der Merwe and you've got a Pierre Schoeman and you've got whoever else in the team, they're not Sione Tuipulotu, Scottish granny. Bring all these guys in, yeah, okay. It's not exactly a team drawn from Selkirk and Hawick and Jedburgh, but if they win something, they can inspire a next generation of rugby players who are from the borders, who are from Edinburgh, Aberdeen, up and down the country. That's the long game. But it's a constant source of amazement to me that Scotland have won. Not that Scotland have won nothing for 22 years as a country, but the fact that Murrayfield is nearly full most of the time. In fact, it is full most of the time. I'm wondering in Ireland, if Ireland hadn't won anything as a country in 22 years, what would the Aviva look like? It's the fans keep coming out in desperate hope that something happens. And if Duhan van der Merwe and Pierre Schoeman and whoever else is wearing the blue jersey when they lift the Six Nations trophy, if they ever lift it, they won't give a damn about that.
No, and look, I'd argue there's been plenty of false dawns, but in those false dawns there's always been hope. I remember sitting in Rome a few years ago when Ireland had won, and no one was expecting Scotland to play well at Twickenham against England. And next thing, Scotland are playing this champagne rugby, or the Scotland team that beat England a couple of years ago playing really well and having to hang on at the end. But that notwithstanding, there are times when you think that Scotland are ready to kick to the next level.
Yeah, Yeah, it's the hope that kills you. Putting on my Scottish cap here. Look, they have a good set of players. They've had a good set of players for the last 4 or 5 years. They're just not good enough. Ireland are better. Wales have been better. England have been better. France are now better. Scotland have beaten most of those countries in the Gregor Townsend era, but they haven't been able to do it consistently. And they've lost a lot of games by small margins in the Six Nations. This is Townsend's sixth Six Nations. They've lost a lot of Six Nations games by small margins, by a daft penalty given away at the wrong time, a butchered try opportunity, a bit of mental weakness, defensive weakness, and the game is gone. And that must do Townsend's head in, absolutely do his head in, because just when he thinks they're getting close, like say last season, they beat England in week 1. They go to Wales, who are horrifically bad, and they have a load of injuries, and Scotland play awfully and lose. Finn Russell gets a yellow card, and it's a nightmarish experience, and it sets them back on their heels. So it's you wish, because it's painful actually to watch it, to how much these players want it, and how painful it is when it goes south yet again.
Yeah, I remember how frustrated I figure Gregor Townsend was when he came into the press room at the Aviva a couple of years ago, when effectively one of the best players you're expecting in Hogg, a guy with so much experience, he's played for the Lions, he catches that ball, Scotland potentially get a win against Ireland, and maybe that whole Six Nations campaign looks different.
Well, yeah, it does. That's right. I mean, they have wasted a lot of opportunities try-scoring opportunities against Ireland. Hogg is the classic one. There was others in that game. There were others in other games. There's a kind of, I don't know, they shoot themselves in the foot in so many different ways. Going to Dublin last year, the week before, 5, 6 of the players, including Hogg, went out on an unauthorised night out in Edinburgh, and it caused chaos in the squad. Finn Russell being one of them, caused chaos that week leading up to Ireland. The story broke the day before the Ireland game, and again, it's this off-field stuff. Townsend and Finn Russell, thankfully they're back in the straight and narrow now, but they're never far from. It's like the French rugby team of old, chaos is never far away.
Is that a reasonably tempestuous relationship that's there between Townsend and Finn Russell? Because I would have thought on the face of it, when Gregor Townsend took over, that Finn Russell will almost be the ideal out half. He would be the guy who would bring that little bit of X factor, who would do something slightly different. Yeah. A bit like Gregor Townsend, who was a wonderful flair player in his own time, but still so many times he's had to stand in front of the media and defend Finn Russell for various things that have happened, particularly the ones off the field, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, Gregor Townsend the player and Gregor Townsend the coach are very different. And Finn Russell he's a bit of a genius. He's a flawed genius for sure. But he can do things that no other rugby player can do, and he does things that no other great rugby player would ever do. So there's the twin side. Johnny Sexton would never do some of the things ever that Finn Russell does, good and bad. I think, like the way Finn Russell sees it, or saw it, hopefully it's in the past, that Townsend is too restrictive in his coaching, and he's too restrictive in terms of the squad ethos. He doesn't like it. He's been over in Paris for a number of years now. He gets carte blanche to do whatever he wants, as long as he turns up and he plays well, trains well. He can go and have a few pints. He can do. They don't keep an eye on his social life. They don't care as long as he plays. Whereas you're in the hothouse of a Scotland Six Nations camp, Townsend is all over it, and Russell hasn't had the same freedom. So that has been the clash off the field. There's been a clash on the field as well, when Finn's view of the game has been different to Gregor's view of the game. I think they're destined to always have that kind of friction, that kind of relationship. But they seem to be in a decent place at the moment.
Yeah, I think in a perfect world you'd like to have Finn Russell to have as much creative control as he needs on the field, but not to be bringing some of his teammates downtown in Edinburgh in the middle of a camp before the Six Nations. There is definitely a happy medium where it's not both at the same time. Just on a final one, Tom, when it comes to Townsend's own position, as you say, there's been the winds of change, and maybe we didn't expect that Wayne Pivac would be getting replaced by a returning Welsh coach in Warren Gatland. Many of us thought that England were going to stick potentially with Eddie Jones, and now here's Eddie Jones as the coach of Australia going into a World Cup, and Steve Borthwick in charge of England coming into the Six Nations. Where is Gregor Townsend? Is Gregor Townsend 100% safe going into this World Cup, no matter what happens over the next 2 months?
Yeah, he is. I don't, even if they bomb out in the Six Nations, I'd be surprised if he was replaced. I don't think they will bomb out in the Six Nations. I think they'll do okay. So I think he'll be there until the World Cup. He's kind of like, the situation is his contract is up at the end of the World Cup. We were asking Townsend about it today. He's obviously been linked with Leicester. He says there's no truth in that at all. He says he don't know where that's come from. He says he was contacted by the French Rugby Union to see if he would be interested in a coaching position there. He says nothing has come of that. He doesn't know whether he wants to stay, but he doesn't know whether the SRU want him to stay. So there's a bit of a standoff there. The SRU will say, well, have been saying privately that, well, we're looking at all the candidates and, see what's out there. And if Gregor is the best man for the job, then we'll offer him a new contract. But we're going through that process. So we're kind of in a holding pattern at the moment. It's not ideal, but we asked Townsend today, could this affect the players? And he says, no, these guys are playing for Six Nations. They're playing for places in a World Cup. What's my contractual situation got to do with that? It should be irrelevant for any player worth their salt. That's not an excuse that they can use.
Yeah, I think he has a lot different leverage if the Six Nations goes well and if the run into the World Cup goes well. So it's a risk on both sides when it comes to this.
Well, yeah. I mean, if the Six Nations goes well, then he can write his own number on a piece of paper and hand it over.
Tom, thanks a million for bringing us up to speed. Our rugby coverage here on Off the Ball with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Rugby on Off the Ball
with Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.